All right, and we are live. Welcome back to another episode here on the Esports Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Clark, and today I have NRG Art Director on the show, Josh Soriano. Josh, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on the show, man. Big fan.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on. And for anyone who might not know who you are, what you do, just kind of give us the rundown of how you got into content creation and into esports, and ultimately to your position as art director right now.
Yeah, I mean, design's always been something I've been passionate about. I mean, just like making things look good. I mean, like when you go back to when you were younger and just like drawing and my handwriting, I get comments where it's like, oh, you have girl handwriting, but it's just like me being a perfectionist, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I always had the neat notes in class, but obviously that kind of led me into being a little bit more on the artistic side. And so when it came to esports, it's not the traditional way, I wouldn't say. There's a lot of talented designers that have been, grinding for years since esports in its infancy. I mean, we're still kind of in its infancy, but even earlier in its early stages. And basically I found it on Hitmarker, the job board that we see on social media a lot. And NRG actually had a social media coordinator position. And I kind of just, threw an application out there just to see if it would stick. It's definitely not a designer role by any means, but I managed to go ahead and get that role. And I was running NRG socials for a good while, I would say a few months. I wasn't bad, but there are definitely other people that could do my job better. And one thing I really appreciated about NRG is their openness to talk about your, professional growth in the company. And so that's what I did with Grady Rains, who was my boss at the time. And I was just like, hey, I think I could really contribute as a designer on this team. And so he allowed me to kind of transition into that role. And so I became a full-time graphic designer for NRG. And that's been it for about a year and a half. And now, most recently, like in the past couple months, I was promoted to an art director role. And so that's kind of been my journey as far as esports goes. It's very short and not as long as many other designers and creatives in the space maybe. But, I'm very lucky and fortunate to have been given the opportunities that I've gotten.
Yeah, I mean, definitely luck plays a part, but I mean, you got to be skilled to get to
where definitely.
Definitely don't. You can sell yourself short, but I'm not going to sell you short. Definitely want to give you a credit where it's due. And I think it's also a good example of how everyone's journey is different, because I think a lot of people get into this mentality of you have to grind for X amount of years before you can get your shot. But your story is proof. I mean, that doesn't have to happen. I mean, if you're talented and you're going to get opportunities. I'm curious though, when you were looking for those opportunities, what stood out about going into esports? I know we were talking off air briefly. You previously worked in the startup world, walked away from that. So like, what made you want to get into the esports scene?
I mean, just on a personal level, like I've gamed all my life. I was, my parents had to pry me off of, my Xbox 360 when I was in middle school, because I would just like stay up into the late hours of the night, and then wake up in the early hours of the morning and just to get back on. And so being around gaming, it seems so enticing, in itself, but, just esports and how much it's grown in the past few years, and hearing things like, these different prize pools and how much money is going into the space, and the fact that there are people having opportunities for full-time positions, and actually making a living off of being in the gaming world, was just, it's an attractive idea. And I mean, why would you not want to be able to blend something that you love so much and also make money at the same time and make a living off of that? But also it allowed me to, get into the esports world at its infancy and at this stage. There's something nice. I think that's what really attracts me to being in these startup environments, is like, there's something nice about being in the humble beginnings of things and seeing things prosper and grow. And I think that's a big reason why I wanted to jump into the world of esports, is because it's exciting, shiny and new. And obviously the ceiling is so high for this space, and something I'm pretty passionate about.
What's it been like for you over the course of the past year and a half? Like you said, your career hasn't been that long so far. So, but even in that time, esports has evolved a ton and changed a ton, and especially over this
100%.
past year with quarantine. So what's that been like?
I've just been, I think the one thing that I've kind of told myself is that I have to be a sponge. Being so new to the space, you kind of just have to be willing to absorb as much information and inform yourself on the different parts of the industry. So realizing, at the end of the day, esports is a business. And, as much as you may be a fan of video games and competition and things like that, there's also, like, at the end of the day, you need to make money for things to continue to, exist. And so I've been learning a lot about how esports as a business works. Been learning more about how to be valuable as an employee in this space, because one of the things that I talked about earlier is there's so many other talented designers in esports. And so what can you do to make, set yourself apart other than, being able to do a specific effect in Photoshop and things like that. And so that's the kind of thing I've been trying to pride myself on, is just trying to make myself valuable. How can I, have my hand in a different bucket other than just being a graphic designer? So one thing that I also help out with is like web design on the NRG side. And so that's kind of been my other hand in another bucket, and it's kind of, made myself a little bit more valuable. At least I'd hope so.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Got you. So how would you say, I know you had mentioned for you personally, you kind of go into web design a little bit more, but like in general, if there's a up and coming graphic designer watching this right now, that's maybe been that person that's grinding for a year or 2 years, even longer than that, and they're trying to figure out how to break in, like, what would your advice to them be on how to make themselves more valuable relative to the competition?
Yeah. Kind of harping back on that last point is just having your specialties is great, and being a master of a specific thing, whether that's motion graphics, whether that's 3D, whether that's web design or something like that. That's always great. But at least in the startup world, it seems like a lot of people seem to value multifaceted, multidisciplinary employees. And so that just adds value to the worker that you are. So if you're able to, if you're pretty sound on graphic design and 2D, throwing in some motion design and becoming a specialist at that would really help your case, and breaking into this esports world, because the more you can do, the more valuable you are, and the more irreplaceable you are, and it makes people want you. But obviously, at the end of the day, you also have to do good work. So I try to make sure that even though I'm trying to get my hands in different buckets, the quality of work shouldn't diminish at all.
Makes sense. And then kind of taking it back a little bit to that interview process and the process of actually getting hired as the social media manager, was there anything you picked up throughout that process that maybe was unique to esports in the interview process and the hiring process that you didn't see before? There might not be an answer to that question, but I'm just curious.
There's a lot of things that I remember. There was a few exercises that Grady had me do that were definitely things that I haven't done before. So like things like captioning certain things, and how, envisioning the voice of NRG, and how would you put this, on the timeline? How would you put NRG's voice on the timeline with this picture, or with this, this YouTube thumbnail? What's the title of this video that we would upload? So the small intricacies like that are definitely centered around the esports world, and also across other spaces too, but specifically the esports world. Those kinds of things are kind of what sets you apart. Your voice, how you're portrayed on social media and on the timeline is huge. So that I think that's like one of the biggest things that stood out during that interview, at least that social media interview. So
got you. Cool. No, that's good to know. And now kind of getting back into your current day-to-day, what does that look like? So as the art director, and first of all, congratulations. I know you had mentioned that's a fairly recent promotion. But what does that day-to-day look like for you? Like, what responsibilities do you have? What are you in charge of on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Thank you for the props on that. I appreciate that. Yeah. Like you said, it's very recent. So, like my day-to-day currently, it's not too far off of what it used to be. obviously because just it being so recent and we haven't yet expanded our creative team. But I'm still glad that I do get to be a little bit more hands-on, even as an art director. And so usually, I mean, every day is different, but usually, at least with our workflow, we have a long list of tasks for each creative on our team. And you basically are just given free reign to kind of just tackle those one by one in the way you see fit, obviously meeting deadlines and meeting with stakeholders that you need to. Our project manager does a great job of making sure that we have enough, time in advance to complete things, because burnout is real. And with how fast the space moves, like you're moving on from one project to another. So you kind of have to, it's just one thing you have to adapt to. So usually if I knock out meetings earlier in the morning. So whether that's, a design team meeting, or that could be a all team meeting that we have every week. The company kind of comes together and kind of goes over what's going on with the org and any big news, any announcements, any new employees that we've hired. We get to meet them there. And so all those meetings are taken care of usually earlier in the day. And then I kind of start going through my list and seeing what I need. So that could be, thumbnails, that could be coming up with new art direction for the next events that we have or next matches or tournaments that we have coming up. Or it could come down to even things like sponsorships. So if we have a new sponsor and they need to have specific assets on streams for our players, we have to get those created. So tasks range from all these different spaces. And so you kind of have to tackle those. And then towards the end of the day, you kind of get to relax a little bit, chill on the timeline, see what's new, gather some inspiration. It's always nice to step back and away from Photoshop and the artboards and things like that. Because once you look at something for too long, at least this is how I am. When I look at something for too long, it starts to look weird and I need to just take a break from the screen. And so that's when I'll go and, go to the gym, go play basketball, walk my dog or something like that. And, but yeah, it's like it's a typical work day, and some days are later, some days are earlier. But I think that's the great part about this job is like it doesn't get old.
Awesome. Of all those things that you do, like the thumbnails, promos, game day graphics, like what's your favorite piece of art to work on?
This is a tough question. It's a tough one because we like I said, we see a lot of things come through and a lot of different requests. Man, I don't know. I would say I think the coolest things are, at least with the way that we've strategized, at least with our art direction, is that we want our champions graphics to be like have a little bit more like oomph than our normal like live now and game day graphics and victory graphics. So when we're able to put a little extra on those champions graphics, and obviously not only is it nice to be able to go the extra mile on a champions graphic, but obviously the org is winning. It's good for the players. So it's always nice to be part of a winning culture, which is definitely fostered here at NRG. So those champion graphics are fun. And it's definitely challenged me too, because I didn't know motion design coming into this, and I've kind of tried to slowly learn more and more about it. I'm definitely not a master by any means, but I think those champions graphics do make it worthwhile. Because like at the end of the day, that's kind of like the success metric for a lot of teams and orgs.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Has there ever been a situation where maybe you made one of those and it doesn't happen? Like I can imagine there's certain situations where you make a graphic beforehand and then just the match doesn't go quite the way we would have hoped.
100%. I mean, it's just, in any sort of competition, social media design, like you're going to have to prepare for any outcome. And so that includes a lot of your graphics not being used. And that's just something that you also kind of have to come to terms with as much as you would love to see your work out there. The only good thing is that if it's not used for that week or that specific event, you have a template or you have the foundation for what could be used later on. And so you definitely save yourself some time there. And I'm always one to find out how you can work a little bit smarter and not harder, at least in this space with how fast it goes.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, for me personally, I'm not a huge graphic designer. I make YouTube thumbnails. That's about it. But when it comes to like just creating content, creating YouTube videos, putting stuff on social media, like the more you can have a system in place, it just makes it so much easier. Because like you said, everything moves so quickly, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed. Besides what you just mentioned with the champion graphics and potentially having templates you haven't used, are there what other things are you doing in implementing in terms of systems to make that process a bit more streamlined?
Yeah, so I mean, I work closely with our project manager just to make sure that design requests that are coming from different departments throughout the organization. So whether that's from partnerships or whether that's from the content team, and say like they need like lower thirds made for a video, or they need, you know, a new intro or any of that stuff. We just try to make sure, I try to work with my project manager to make sure that there is at least like, you know, a day or two for us to crank out those assets that they need. And we use Trello as our kind of what would you call project management system or project management application. And being able to see, visually see when people have a lot, you know, building up on their plate and things like that. That also allows me, especially looking at other designers and that may be on our team, like where I can step in and be like, hey, do you need help with something? Do you need help with that? Do you want me to take this off your plate so you can focus on this project? And I have a weekly design team meeting. Well, our design team is only 2 at this moment, aside from other people that we freelance with, but with Nikki, who's our other designer. And so me and her meet on a weekly basis. And there I always check in to make sure, one, that she's not being overworked, if she's hitting any roadblocks. And that's also where we kind of go back and forth on any work we're doing, and kind of giving critiques and suggestions and opinions on different things that we're working on. So communication is key. So everyone's going to be, you know, loaded at some point or another. And so as long as there's an open line of communication with your project manager and your boss, we do a great job of making sure that no one gets burnt out there. So that keeps it well organized for us.
Awesome. And kind of I guess a random question, but I know recently Twitter got rid of the crop, at least on mobile. How has that affected things in terms of your designs? Have you guys experimented with any different dimensions, any different styles now that that's been changed? It's
definitely a conversation. I think maybe the beginning of this week, I actually messaged our social media manager to talk more about it. And one thing that we want to do before we go ahead and do that is just kind of analyze or just reference data and just see like the number of our audience that, or the percentage of our audience that is actually like, you know, interacting and viewing our content on mobile. If it's, you know, substantially higher, then, you know, maybe we do have to cater and take up more real estate there. But for the meantime, we're going to find some workarounds until we have that data. But it is something that I was very excited about when I saw it, just because the more real estate that you can take up on a timeline, the better. But at the end of the day, you also want to be able to show off, you know, your work and make sure it's not just cropped out. And, you know, especially if you're showing like a score line or something, and you don't want to get cropped out or anything like that. So, but it's something I'm excited to experiment with for sure.
Got you. And you had mentioned analytics there. Like, what role do the numbers play in terms of how you approach coming up with concepts? Like, how close are you looking at data from social or on websites, or what role does that play?
That's a new world that we've been diving into here at NRG, at least with our, especially with our new apparel sites that we launched with the San Francisco Shock and NRG. We've been doing a lot of A/B testing to see what aspects of the user interface that we've thrown in there, you know, alter different events and actions that a customer might take. So we've been trying to dive deep into those analytics every week. We have apparel meetings every week as well to kind of review data and see like how we did for this week, or how, you know, for instance, like if we remove the hero image on the NRG shop, do people seem to convert more? Does having more, does having like a featured item list on the NRG shop, do customers tend to add those items to the cart more than anything that's below that? So it's a lot of A/B testing and tracking that to see what happens. So things like that have been awesome to look into, just because at least when I was at that startup doing UI design, everything was data backed, and so being able to go back to data driven decisions is a really nice touch for us.
For sure. Have there been any situations yet where maybe the data points to something being successful that isn't really as aesthetically pleasing? So like, for example,
100%.
when I create my YouTube thumbnails, a lot of times the thumbnail could look like complete garbage, but it's effective.
Yes.
On the other hand, you can make something that's aesthetically pleasing. It looks great, but it gets like a 2% CTR, and you're like, what happened? Like, why is there that difference? Has there been any situations like that for you guys?
Yeah, plenty of times. And that was one thing I actually had to learn about even when I was a social media coordinator, is just that when I was talking with I didn't know anything about YouTube thumbnails. I just wanted to, at least the designer in me just wanted to make it look aesthetically pleasing. But, I was told that, faces do really well making things. I mean, the clickbait's real. Like, let's be honest. Clickbait,
the surprise face that you see on. I'm guilty of it too sometimes, but
yeah, it definitely, the bright colors. There's all these different sciences of YouTube thumbnails that I still don't even. I mean, I still struggle to like kind of come to terms with. And designer in me just wants symmetry and everything like that. There's all these different constraints, but I think that's one thing that you also have to learn when you become a designer or professional designer in anything, is that numbers don't lie. And, sometimes you just kind of have to sacrifice your own, creative opinion, because at the end of the day, like you said, it's effective and the numbers come in. So, but that's definitely something we run into a lot.
Makes sense. Are there any other like things that, I mean, let's say a graphic designer is freelancing right now, or just maybe they're a younger graphic designer just kind of grinding on the timeline, making things for themselves and trying to get noticed. Like, is there anything that they should be aware of as they transition into having a job in, I don't want to say a corporate environment, but at an actual company? Are there any other facets that they should be aware of that might catch them off guard at first, if that makes sense?
I think as much as your skill is important, like as crucial as it is to be good at what you do, it is also important to be cognizant about how you carry yourself and how you interact with others, especially your clients, especially your superiors. When it comes to your job, being able to communicate well, communicate your design decisions, but also, take in feedback, be able to, work with them and kind of, differentiate what's, you can't take anything personally. I know as artists, like when people want to critique things, it definitely hurts a little bit, but at the end of the day, like that's your client and you're doing work for them. And so, being able to handle yourself in a professional manner, be timely with emails, use language that is, a little bit more professional. It's not like Twitter DMs necessarily all the time when you're messaging a higher up in an esports organization. So those soft skills of being able to handle yourself professionally are huge. Skills can be taught and they can be nurtured and you can practice those. But those soft skills are the things that tend to take a little bit more time. So the more you can hone in on those, I feel like you'll be in a good position as an employee, regardless of where you go.
How did you kind of hone those in? Was it something that maybe came a little bit naturally to you, or over time, what was your approach to getting better at those things?
It definitely did not come naturally. I'm a very quiet person. I am very much an introvert. And so doing things that are a little, I think putting yourself in uncomfortable situations and new situations are what's going to bring you out of your shell. So, I mean, for instance, like I've never done a podcast before. I'm not a big public
speaker. I'm honored that I'm the first podcast you're on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. But yeah, like, so things like this, where it's just like, you kind of have to come out and talk and speak your mind, even though I struggle with like imposter syndrome and being like, I don't really feel like I, have any value as a designer. I've only been doing this for a year. Like how, how could I compare to somebody that's been doing this for, 10 years or something like that? But I think you kind of just have to, it's one of those fake it till you make it things. So putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, hopping on a podcast if somebody wants to talk, offering advice that you think that would help them. And I mean, even internally, like if you're talking with, a manager and you need to justify your own creative decisions, stand up for what you made, reason with them. The more you can communicate that, the better, and the more that people can see your side of things. So you just got to consistently put yourself in those situations to do so, or else you'll never really practice it. Or you can like practice in the mirror, but I mean, it kind of depends how you want to go about it. I think the real world way is the better way. So
makes sense. And I appreciate you bringing up the imposter syndrome, because I mean, I think everyone deals with it, and whether they want to admit it or not, because I know I do for sure. And I haven't been doing this all that long. I mean, I've been doing social media stuff and marketing stuff for 2 years, 3 years, maybe. And it's hard to not compare yourself to someone who's been doing it for a decade or more than a decade, even though like, you're talented. Like you're obviously extremely talented. And I like to think I might be a little bit, like there's the imposter syndrome again. But how do you overcome that? Or how do you put yourself in a position where it doesn't really affect you as much? Is there anything that you use personally?
I mean, I think this is where it's kind of depends on the person on how you want to handle it. I think a lot of my imposter syndrome like stems from social media and just being on there a lot more than I probably need to be. There's the good of being on social media because there's so much inspiration and there's so much great talent out there that you see all this great work. And so you get to engage with the community and network, which is the great part of it. But also you need to like just mentally rewire it to where, at least for me, I had to mentally rewire to be like, I can't continually compare myself to this designer or this designer, because that's just how it is. And and it's natural to feel that way, but, I think it's also like a continuous thing. It's not one day you're going to stop caring about, stop comparing yourself, because it's just like something you have to remind yourself that you're on your own journey. Personal progress is key. You shouldn't measure yourself to the journey of somebody else. So that's what I've had to do. And I tend to stay off of social media to an extent. Obviously I go on to make sure, be updated with different things that are going on. But I'm not scouring the timeline forever, and kind of digging myself into a deep hole there. But it's just finding that balance between finding inspiration and also, not being there long enough to compare yourself to other things, and just, I don't know. It's a hard thing to manage for sure. But that's been my thing.
It's super hard to manage because especially Twitter, it almost feels productive to scroll and to engage. Because I mean, you make awesome connections. Like I met you through Twitter. I met pretty much everyone in the esports community through Twitter, and I wouldn't have those relationships without it. So it's a great platform, but there is that dark side, and it's really tricky to balance, especially being in the profession of content creation and marketing. Like you kind of have to know what's going on.
Exactly.
But you have to like pull it back just enough so you don't go off the deep end. And that's super difficult. So I don't think anyone has it figured out just yet. But I think it's good for everyone to know that like we all go through it, and like we all understand how that feels.
Yeah. It's just as long as you understand, you have to be confident in yourself. And I like try to remind myself that, I'm in the position I am for a reason. Like you said, there is credit due for where you are. And I like to think that I've worked hard for what I've done or where I am so far. And so being able to be real with yourself in that regard definitely helps out too. Just kind of, you do good work, and that's just something you have to remind yourself every day when you log on.
Yeah. What do you do when you're not on social? Obviously, a lot of that's going to be work and design, being in Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're not in Photoshop or Premiere or After Effects or any of those platforms, what are you doing to get your mind off of things and to kind of reset?
A lot of my time is spent. It depends on what like I guess the season. If a lot
Yeah.
of my time is also spent, especially with how esports is and how hours can range longer than usual in a day. I try to spend as much time with. I live with my girlfriend and our dog, so I try to spend as much time with them as I can after work, and so that's going on walks or maybe we go for a run or something like that. I always am on FaceTime with my cousins and my family back here in Northern California. And so being able to step away from work and just kind of interact with people that I love, and especially in this, in the past year and a half where social interaction was very limited, it was very needed to be able to, interact with people, even if it was just through the screen. So things like that definitely help me unwind. I'm a big Sacramento Kings fan, just like the hometown team. So you'll usually find me watching those games and probably tweeting about it and how our drought of not being in the playoffs is continuing. And so,
Yeah, I'm not jealous of you as a Lakers fan. I went through it for, what was it, like 5 or 6 years from that like 2012 to, I forget exactly what the year was, but it was a rough few years. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, so it's definitely a hard time to be a Kings fan. It's been a hard time to be a Kings fan, but I don't know. You gotta stay hopeful.
Yeah, it'll get better, hopefully.
Yeah.
But kind of shifting gears a little bit back into the design world and the esports world. As you're going about building out your team, whenever that may be in the future, like as you're looking to bring on new people, like what are you looking for in addition to your team as a graphic designer? Because I know a lot of designers want to know what they should be doing, and there's a lot of really polarized opinions about whether or not you should be putting out work on the timeline for free and tagging people and all those different things. And obviously it's going to depend on the person, going to depend on who's doing the hiring. But from your perspective, what would you like to see from someone who's trying to break in and get that design job?
I'd like to think that, I when it comes to, if you're a freelancer, obviously putting out your work that you've done and doing, regardless of whether you're getting charged for it or not, if you think it's quality work, I think it's worth doing. And if it's something like, at the end of the day, like the more you practice, it's not wasted.
Yeah.
At least that's the way I see it. I understand the argument where, if there's designers doing it for free, it kind of diminishes it kind of just diminishes the other work that all other designers do and makes it just seem like, it kind of diminishes the worth, I guess you could say. But just personally, I just feel like any work that you do is worth doing, regardless of whether you think you should be paid or not. As long as you deem it worth, that's all that matters. But as far as like what I'm looking for, I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. It's just like I appreciate skill and your craft, but if you're not able to communicate with another person about why you did your design decisions, and if you're not able to manage your time effectively and efficiently to where you consistently miss deadlines and things like that, that's like things you kind of have to work on. And that kind of stuff is super important, especially in a space that moves so fast, like I said, and we continually to harp on. But I think as far as like what I'm looking for in this near future, it's kind of like keeping in touch with the trends of what I see on the timeline. Obviously 3D has been huge. At least what I've noticed in the past like few months.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I saw. I mean, Nikki, who is on our design team, she's been messing around in Blender, and this is not something that we like talked about necessarily. Like, hey, I think you need to go start learning Blender. Like she's taking the initiative to go and learn that herself. and add that to her, her toolkit. So it's like things like that, being able to be a sponge and continually learn and educate yourselves on new skills and techniques. Like those are great signs of someone, a creative in this space. And so that's things I'll look for. I think obviously that'll change day to day, just depending on where we are. But I think, going back on what I said, it's just those soft skills of being able to manage your time efficiently, communication. Those things are super valuable, I think, at least coming from somebody that would be taking on a little bit more of a leadership role. I would hope so.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think that doesn't even just apply to design or editing. It applies pretty much in every field. Like, you got to be able to communicate and defend your points and just communicate with other human beings. So 100% agree with you there. Now, kind of getting into your creative process. So obviously, as an art director, I would assume you're at least somewhat creative, and as someone who can struggle with like coming up with ideas sometimes and kind of getting into ruts and whatnot, how do you approach that process of taking something from like ground zero to finished product? Like, how are you coming up with those ideas?
Yeah, I think at least for me, the first thing that when I'm given, like, say, a problem for like a problem or some sort of brief, it's just like, what is the overall objective? Are we and that can be broken down into per graphic. So like with a live now graphic, what is the thing that what kind of value are we needing? Are we needing to show the opponents? Are we trying to show the matchup? Do we need to show, I don't know. It could be things like that. But having that North Star is always a great starting point. It's just figuring out what is your overall objective with this art direction. And then kind of going from there, gathering inspiration is obviously the next step. So whether that's, looking at what else is on the timeline, I live on Pinterest. That's my platform. I usually go there for any sort of artistic inspiration, just because there's so much on there. And I'm not sitting, most of the time, it's not just esports things. Like I'm going into different spaces, even sports and fashion and things like that, to see what I can draw from. And even outside of technology, like when I'm driving around, seeing billboards, especially around LA, like there's always things that are going to catch your eye.
Yeah, definitely.
So taking inspiration is obviously that next point. And then kind of from there is just letting your mind run wild. I like to think that there's this trial and error period where you kind of just start building out what you think can work, and you don't have to have it finalized by any means, but bringing something to the table for the team to look at. And that's the next step, is basically coming together and looking at things and being like, I like this communicates well. I don't like this kind of strays away from the objective that we talked about earlier. And then also thinking how we future-proof art direction. So it's like, what happens if we make, this tournament? How can we alter this art direction to be a little bit more unique, but also still, stay true to it? And so there's all those different steps that go into the creative process. But I think the most important part is realizing that a lot of this is iteration, and none of it's set in stone. So you're always going to be able to improve. And a lot of times when I see a graphic up on the timeline and I look at it long enough, I'm just like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe for next time we can, switch this around and things like that. So I think reminding yourself that it's an iteration and our direction is meant to evolve, relieve some of that pressure to where you don't need to be, hit it right the first time. But as long as you hit your objective and it communicates well, I think you can say it's a job well done as far as the direction goes.
Makes sense. How far ahead are you guys planning? So you mentioned like future-proof and stuff. So obviously, I think it's probably going to depend. But in general, how far ahead do you guys plan?
It's never like a specific range. It's just more it depends on the project. Excuse me. It kind of depends on the project. So I try to make sure, one thing that I love about our team is that our social media managers are also pretty well versed in Photoshop, and so
Okay.
it makes it kind of easy for us designers to make templates that we may be reusing in the future. And our social media managers are able to go in and, you know, add a different logo, opponent's logo, or change type if they need to, and if all that. As long as we set the foundation and set the document organized in a way that they're able to find their way and manipulate things, it rids us of the need to, you know, be on call and be at our computers throughout the entire tournament, because all those different scenarios are able to be managed by our social media managers. So that was one way we kind of future-proof things, is like making sure things are templated, so that we don't have to work harder than we have to.
Yeah.
And I mean, just constantly being, you know, keeping in touch and making sure you're in tune with and updated on like what the org is doing. So if you know, like for us, we have a calendar that everyone is able to see, and you can see the upcoming events coming up. And so if I have a day where I finish work early, I can kind of look forward towards the calendar and see like, oh, we have this big tournament coming up. I can start brainstorming and starting that creative process on that. And so that's one thing I love about NRG, is just the transparency that they have with our creative team, and having things like that to access is really nice.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I mean, from everything you said about NRG, it sounds like it's a great environment to work in. And what do you think makes it such a good environment? Like, what do you think? What do you think makes it such a good environment?
Yeah, I think it's just everyone is very the support that you get around your work, and the small wins, especially as a content creator. Like, at least for me, like we do graphics. Like it's such a small cog in a bigger machine. It's like the graphics that you see on a tweet. But at the end of the day, like you'll see in our Slack channels, like you'll see a lot of people being like, you know, great job on the graphics this week. Or even the things like our content, like if a video is popping off numbers wise, like you hear it in the Slack channels. And I think that's a great, like, that's one of those things that also helps defeat imposter syndrome, is the support of your colleagues. And I think that at least NRG has done a great job of making sure they foster an environment that it is encouraging and, you know, supporting one another in their craft. And I think that's one of the best parts about working on this creative team over here.
I love that. And before we move on to this general esports talk, is there anything else within graphic design or within your specific field of work that you feel like we didn't touch on that you want to highlight?
I mean, I think I don't want to, this is just my like outlook on like just being a designer in the esports world, or just being a designer or a professional in the workforce. Is just like, I try not to let my job define me, if that makes sense. Like, it's just my job, but it's not necessarily like, you know, I try to make sure that my life is kind of centered around the person I want to be, rather not like the job I want to have. And I think when you start like looking at it that way, a lot of good opportunities come your way. And so at least with my story, it's like the opportunities came up to where like I was able to join and get my foot in the door with being a social media manager. And that ultimately led to me being an art director now. So these opportunities are going to come knocking, and you're just going to have to kind of say yes, even though you may not necessarily know if this is the right step, and it may not be the cookie cutter way of doing it. But, you know, as long as you continue to push yourself forward and, you know, invest in your own growth and professional growth, I think you'll end up where you want to be.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's super important to understand, especially for young people coming up. It's very easy to get caught up in the grind mentality, and I definitely have at many points, and I probably will in the future at some point too. It's because it's really easy to get caught up in that mentality, especially when you love what you do. Like when you're working in an industry like esports and doing content creation, it's fun and like you enjoy it. So it's difficult not to let it consume you. But it is super important to set those boundaries and understand that, your job does not define you. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. Of course.
Awesome. So now, kind of rounding out the episode, I just want to ask you, like, what excites you about esports in the next 1, 2, 3 years? And it's a super broad question, but feel free to take that.
I mean, that's the thing. It's just like, I mean, me being so, I mean, coming in and only being in this space for so long, or for, I mean, a short time, I think I still can't even wrap around my head, like how big this can actually get. And so, but things that I would love to start seeing is just, at least for me, this is like a personal anecdote, is just like when I go to family parties or, you know, I meet people and they ask what I do, I obviously say, hey, I work in esports, I work as a designer and things like that. And then that ultimately opens the door of, what is esports? Oh, this is gaming. And like, people are starting to get, you know, the idea, but there's still those that are of like the older generations that you still kind of have to break it down and be like, explain what Twitch is. And like, you're watching somebody play video games. Like, they don't understand that concept. So I mean, just personally, I would love to get to a point where when you say you work in esports, the same thing is like, you work in sports. Like, it's just like an accepted thing and people kind of understand how big it is and the amount of money that goes into it. And I think we're trending on the right path, especially, I mean, at least I started to notice it when, with the Fortnite World Cup, when people saw the amount of money that was going into that kind of thing and it made national news, people started to take notice a little bit more and take it a little bit more serious. So it would just be nice to have that connotation of what gaming is kind of go away, at least when I talk to people. But I mean, on a bigger scale, it'd be nice. It'd be super cool to see, like, go into a city and have dedicated esports like stadiums and things like that. I think that we could get there for sure. I mean, you're going to hear about all these different plans for, I mean, you see the facilities going up for different organizations and things like that. But imagine, like, you know, places like, you know, just like sports arenas, just like seeing those around the big cities and big market cities, like that would just be awesome. Like, that is where all of Philadelphia esports events are held. And so I think just, I know that's like a very specific part of it, but I think I still have a lot to learn as far as just like how big this esports thing can become. But I think that would be it on a little bit more on an overview level, surface level, I guess.
Makes sense. How do you go about like learning about things? I mean, I would consider myself very, very new in the industry as well. And that definitely is, I don't know if it's a challenge, but like, it definitely is something that I think about a lot. Is like, how do you kind of keep up and how do you make sure you're on top of all this stuff as it's moving so quickly? And obviously it's going to depend on the person. Everyone's going to have their own way to do it. But from your perspective, how do you approach that?
I mean, I just try to consume content. So things like esports economics, like I'm just like tuning in every new episode or any of these other esports related podcasts. Podcast is like my like go-to as far as just like consuming information, especially like even during work. Like, it's just like something you can put on and kind of listen to in the background while you work. But other than that, like, you know, just being alive and in like Twitch streams and things like that, just kind of just immersing yourself in the space as much as you can, wherever content's available. And obviously there's also articles and different blogs and things like that you can keep up with. I personally try to, you know, steer myself away from reading just in general. That's just me. I don't know. I feel like I'm not a big reader.
I was so good about it early this year, and then school got busy, and it fell off hard. I need to get back into it, but
no, definitely. I think it's
100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, if there's an article that comes up and it's, you know, a reputable source and things like that, I'll hop in there. But usually it's just videos on YouTube, Twitch, just immersing myself in the community and, you know, seeing how things are, seeing what's evolving. And then obviously podcasts just like this that talk about all the inner workings of esports that, you know, the normal outsider may not really understand or, you know, get to see.
What's your favorite esport to keep up with right now?
I personally come from, I mean, I wouldn't say come from, but my love is Call of Duty. Like Call of Duty 4 was that was like my favorite game of all time when I was growing up. And so I've just been kind of following that community for the longest time. And so the CDL is definitely the one I keep in touch with the most, but also like coming into NRG, I've like grown to become a fan of all the other different communities that NRG represents. So that's, of course, we have the San Francisco Shock, our Rocket League teams just off the charts. Fortnite, just absolute like legends in their community in their own right. So, and I think that's what I love about NRG too, is that we are, you know, trying our best to represent all facets and all communities of gaming. Like we just recently announced our speedrunning community, and with our other content creators there. So, and that's something I'm excited to dive into and learn about, because I've known that there's a speedrunning community, but it's not something I've ever like dove into. But yeah, CDL is kind of like my bread and butter. It's like one I definitely tune into.
Cool. Are you a Optic Chicago fan?
I am. Yeah.
It's tough right now. I'm hoping it gets better, but it's not looking too hot right now.
It's definitely not the results we would have wanted, but you know, like we've been here before, and all great you know stories have these lows. So we'll see what comes towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if they didn't turn it around, especially when LAN comes back. I think that's what everyone's waiting for. It's like, what's going to happen when everyone gets back on LAN? And I mean, you have guys like Scump, like Formal, that, you know, are arguably some of the best players of all time.
Exactly.
In LAN. So I don't think it'll be a long-term issue. But yeah, it's crazy too. I mean, it just goes to show you how, like, I don't know, it's not short-sighted, but like the scope of focus that people have is very narrow. Like they're like, oh, they've lost 3 matches. Like they're terrible now. And it's hilarious. Like if a NBA team lost 3 games, it's like whatever.
There's so much more season left to play. There's a lot of more game to play. And so gotta stay hopeful. They know what they're doing. They know the game best. They know their team best. And so well, I mean, we're behind them.
For sure. Awesome. And well, as we're starting to wrap up the show, I have 2 more questions for you. The first one being that if you had to have someone watching this walk away with one takeaway, what would that be? You know, it's purposely, like, again, super broad, because you can take this any direction you want out of anything we talked about, or even stuff we didn't talk about. But what would you want someone watching this to really take away from this episode?
I think let's see. I would say initiative is powerful. And I think that also is just something that's embodied in my journey that I came into sports, is just like you kind of have to go and make things happen for yourself. And if you're not willing to take that first step, you can't just expect someone to wait, you know, and, you know, just slide into your DMs one day and just kind of offer you a job. You have to be putting in the work yourself. So take the initiative to make sure you're practicing your skills. I'm not necessarily saying going up to every T1 org and slide in their DMs and ask for a job. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you need to, for sure. You need to, you definitely need to make sure you're taking steps yourself. And you can't just sit back and if things aren't going your way and say, like, you know, you've been rejected from applications in the past, like you have to continue to get up and apply for more jobs, because those jobs come, and you just have to kind of be persistent with it. Be active on social media. That's something that I've been trying to be a little bit more, I guess, just better at, is just interacting with the community, commenting on work, and, you know, just meeting other designers and following them, because the network you build is so much, it's insanely important. I mean, just, I was able to follow you and love the work that you're doing. And now I'm here on the podcast. So it's just like, that in itself is kind of a testament to the network that you build. So I think just being, you know, cognizant of the initiative that you take. So, and if you're in a job currently, I guess that this is also a 2-parter on that. The initiative that you take at your job currently is also important. So at least for me, if there's a new project that comes up and you have some, you know, experience doing it, in this case, like maybe like web design or something like that, maybe you can ask them and be like, hey, I can take on this project, or If there's another asset or another project that may not be in the creative space, it's, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example, but if they're asking somebody to do data and you love data, like maybe see if you can spread your bandwidth a little bit and dive into that.
Yeah.
So just taking that initiative, whether you're employed or not, I think is important.
Got you. And then so we got a question in the chat asking, do you think that esports photography plays a big role in esports media? I would assume yes, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, esports photography is huge. Imagery in itself is huge. The better the quality of an image or asset that you're going to be working with on a graphic, it just makes a graphic designer's job so much more easier. And obviously with no lands and COVID and things like that, like it's been definitely tough to get like updated headshots of everybody and even just like celebratory land shots and things like that. It's definitely hard to have that, and with us being a year and a half through, like not a lot of it's updated. So it definitely does make a huge difference for us as designers. And I don't think that's something that should be downplayed at all, is for those esports photographers and videographers that produce quality work for other creatives to use.
Yeah, I mean, perfect example of the first point you made of it, just the quality of the assets making it easier for graphic designers to work with. I mean, for the thumbnail for this podcast, the image you sent over was very high quality. It was a straight up headshot, nothing in the background. So the subject select tool on Photoshop didn't have any issues. Made my job super easy. So I can only imagine like how much that affects things when you guys are working in the volume that you're working in. So yeah, definitely agree with that point. I think we also had another question from Twitter earlier from Hawk Nelson. He was asking, who's your favorite member of NRG and why is it Hawk?
Okay, so I'm going to say this, and this is the only thing I'm going to say. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but Hawk, whenever we hop into a meeting or something like that, he likes to greet everybody with a nice howdy. And so like that in itself is a reason why Hawk is our favorite NRG team member.
Love that. And the last question I have for you today, it's the hardest one of the entire episode. Are you a coffee person? And if so, how do you drink your coffee?
Oh, I am a coffee person. And I've gone through phases. When I first started drinking coffee, I started drinking it black just because I didn't want to drink it just for the taste. Like I wanted it for for the shot of espresso and the energy of that. But now I've kind of just opened myself up into, adding different types of sugar and creamer and things like that. So now it's definitely not like, crazy, like creamy, but it's definitely a step above black for sure. But I try to make sure that I'm not drinking it for the taste, and just making sure I'm drinking it for how it energizes me. So.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I mean, that's pretty much my approach. I'm a cold brew person. Pretty much drink it straight black. Like it tastes good, don't get me wrong, but I do enjoy the caffeine and all the benefits. Although I wouldn't even say benefits, because over time you just kind of become sensitized to it and you just need more and more.
That's what I'm trying.
That's a topic for a different time.
100%.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, I appreciate you stopping by. This hour flew by. A really, really fun conversation. And for anyone who wants to keep up with your work and what you have going on, where's the best place to find you at?
I mean, Josh Soriano on all socials. So Twitter, Instagram, I'm pretty sure LinkedIn's the same thing too. So definitely connect with me on all those platforms. I'd love to, chop it up in any way I can.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for stopping by. And for all you guys watching all the way till the end, I appreciate you as well. If you enjoy this type of content discussing marketing, business in gaming and esports, hit that subscribe button down below. We just passed 1,000 subscribers, which is cool. I appreciate you all for sticking around. And if you're listening on audio, hit the follow button and drop a 5-star rating and review so we can get the podcast in front of more people. But with that, Josh, again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for everyone else for listening. And I'll go ahead and see you guys in the next episode.